Okay. Well, Grant,
Yeah.
it's good to have you. Thanks for
Thanks for-
joining us here on the
Yeah.
Reluctant Som.
I'm glad to be here in semi-sunny San Francisco
Yeah.
with a beautiful view, and yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah. And Riesling.
Yeah, and Riesling,
Yeah.
of course. I heard that's your daughter's middle name.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. And then that way, when she gets older, people will say, "What do you know about Riesling?" And she'll say, "Riesling's my middle name." That's the long con. It's
Yeah.
either that or she'll just hate me. It's
Right.
her choice, really.
Boy named Sue kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm excited to have you here. We just had a great lunch, and it was really amazing to see yourself along with a couple other Oregon producers here, Big Table Farm and Ravana. And it's great to see you guys kind of working together.
Mhm.
So we've got this nice, slightly shorter interview than we usually would have, but we're going to make it work because you're
Yeah.
here and we
Well,
want to
we can-
capitalize on your time.
I can jam a lot of things.
Yeah.
That's what we do in this wine business, especially as a small producer, is taking a lot of stuff and cramming it into a smaller space.
Yeah, that's well said.
Mhm.
So you are here with us from 100 Sons, or I'm sorry, 100 Sons. And I've had a chance to taste through several of your wines,
Mhm.
and I think all of them are really incredible. But I don't think it was until today that I realized just how small your production is. You've been making wine for how long now here at this winery?
So my wife Renee and I started this project in 2015.
Wow.
So I was working for other wineries, and she was an educator. She was working for the Clackamas School District. The last job she had, she was running the pregnant and parenting teen program.
I see.
So low stress job.
Yeah.
So she was, born kind of in an educating family. Her
Mhm.
father was a teacher, mother was a teacher, so she was a teacher. And yeah, we started this small winery after many years of her teaching and myself working for other wineries. And the idea was we moved to Oregon when we met because there was the idea that someday we would start something, but it took us quite a while to get there.
Mhm. And with almost 10 years now at 100 Sons, you've
Mhm.
expanded pretty significantly. You're still really small, but 3,500 cases a year?
Yeah, the most that we did was the 21 vintage where we did 3,500 cases. That was sort of at we didn't necessarily intend to go to 3,500 cases in 21, but we had lost the 2020 vintage to the smoke damage that happened. So we were kind of overcompensated, and we ended up making a little bit more wine in 21. But our what we're trying to be at the moment is right around that 3,000 case range.
I see. Yeah.
And that's a good range for both her and I to kind of manage the project. I've had a day job since the entire time that we've had 100 Sons. So finally, within the next few months, I'll be moving away from working kind of more day jobs into just focusing on 100 Sons. So it's been a long game. And this is, I tell people, the wine business, if you don't come in with a lot of capital, it is a game of inches, not miles.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, you see wineries pop up all the time, especially in Oregon, I feel like more recently, that are incredibly well funded, right? Because they're finding out that they can get more land for less than Napa or less than Sonoma. So they're kind of jumping that gap to get in there.
I see that a lot. One of the things that we hang our hats on as small producers like Renee and I, and much like Big Table Farms, who we just shared lunch with today, is that these are small, family-run, usually in many cases husband-wife teams or small partner teams that come together and have moved to Oregon to create exceptional wines because it's an amazing place to grow grapes. And I also have to pay reverence to the people like, the Ponzi family or the Adelsheim family that came before us and really paved the way for small producers like us to come in and be able to sort of ride on their coattails, as it
Mhm,
were.
mhm,
And so for us, that community feel, that willingness to share equipment, share ideas, share a table with other people and introduce them to their clients who
mhm.
are buying their wines and introduce them to us, like that's part of what we do in Oregon that I love so much. And there is a lot of capital and outside money flowing in from, I'm seeing it from all over,
Mhm.
Italy,
Cool.
France. A lot of people from Texas and California are coming to Oregon and seeing exactly what you said, which is what a bountiful place. And people are tasting the wines and saying, God, these wines are incredible and authentic and reflection of a place. And there's water, and like everything we do is dry farm. We don't
Mhm.
irrigate anything, and except for the straw. So I don't want to be, that's up in the rocks. But to me, that sense of community is so important,
Mhm.
and something that people helped us. So I hope to help other
Mhm.
people start their own projects and follow their own dreams.
Yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. That's really well said. I think I saw that today with the 3 of the 3 wineries kind of pulling together and doing a lunch together. I thought was just such a cool format, and it's something that we see. It's not challenging to sell Oregon wine. It's just it takes the right kind of account. Here in San Francisco, we have a lot of like hyper focused lists. The list is like exclusively California or French or exclusively Italian. And or there's even, a place that closed recently, unfortunately, but it would only carry California wineries exclusively. So I think that being able to expose people to multiple wines at once in a setting like this is great because all of a sudden you start thinking about your wine list and you think like maybe I need more than just one Oregon Chardonnay or one Oregon Pinot Noir.
Hmm.
It's worth more than that, right?
Yeah.
And while we get a lot of calls for Sonoma and Napa from tourism, I think it's important to reflect on that we get a lot of international travelers that also just want to have really great domestic wine.
Hmm.
And that doesn't stop at the northern border of California.
Yeah, this is my home state. I grew up here. I was born in the Monterey Bay Area, and so was Renee. So obviously, there's a piece of our heart that is cemented in California, and I buy a lot of
Mhm,
California wines. I love to follow my friends who are making California wines. There's incredible stuff coming
mhm,
out of here, no doubt, full stop. But there's unbelievable things coming out of Oregon too, and I get it. I Here in San Francisco, you've got Sonoma, Napa right in your
mhm,
backyard.
mhm,
So it makes sense for that to sort of funnel into the city. But with any sort of, if you're cooking and you look at your spices, if you've only got 4 or 5 of them, it's really fun to start moving away and like
mhm,
having different things. And with international travelers, I can see them syncing with Oregon wines. We do get a lot of international folks that come to Oregon as well,
mhm,
and there oftentimes are a lot of parallels drawn between some of the old world regions in Europe that have through lines that kind of mimic some of what we're doing in Oregon. So that's important, and we see it as we get a lot of we actually we don't export a lot of wine, but we do export small amounts of wine to different countries, Spain, the UK,
That's
Norway.
awesome.
So we have a lot of these countries that have come to us, or importers, and said like, we've had your wine somehow through some odd circumstance, and we really love it, and we think it would fit with what our folks here are interested in, which is a new world wine, but has some flair to it that
Mhm,
reminds them a little bit of home
mhm,
or what they're used to drinking. So it's not so far fetched. It's not like a tremendously ripe style or vice versa. There's through lines in our wines that I think a lot of international folks can kind of comprehend
Get
and
behind.
really
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I actually just had last week I had Robert Weil of Robert Weil Winery, which
Hmm.
is what we're drinking here.
Hmm.
And he's the sixth generation great grandson or whatever. And he was here with I called him his handler, but
Hmm.
Nicholas is the global sales ambassador for the winery. And they went to Oregon before they came, and I said like, "Oh, where'd you guys go?" And I hope you got to see Hundred Suns. And they go, "Yeah, we'd never heard of it before. We went, and the wines are awesome." And they were like posting on their Instagram the Hundred Suns wines. So it was full circle that I'm pouring you their wine when they were just having
Right.
your wine last week, and
It is,
serendipitous.
and the world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And we've had people who've reached out to us from far-flung places, and they had a bottle of our wine because somebody had worked an
Hmm.
internship and they had gotten a bottle and then taken it back to Chile or some other places. And so that's sort of how it all spreads. And it's very gratifying when you start something like Renee and I did with 450 cases of wine.
Hmm.
And that was our first vintage. And every single purchase it seemed almost unbelievable that somebody was actually buying our wine.
Right.
Like, really? Are
Yeah.
you sure? And now that we're, getting close to a decade in, it's a new world.
Hmm.
We're learning, and we the challenges of selling in different markets and how to sell wine. All of these things, they've gone to different levels throughout the
Hmm.
years. And I think when you meet somebody who's just starting off, the tendency is to want to talk about growing grapes and making wine.
Hmm.
And realistically, that's the essence of what we do, and sometimes the most fun.
Hmm.
And then you kind of have to sit down, and they have to realize, okay, now you have to figure out a way to get these wines into somebody's glass, and it has to be good. And then they have to really enjoy what you're doing, and they won't have to buy it not once or twice, and many
Yeah.
years down the road. And it's like I said, a game of inches and not miles.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's well said. There's producers that I've had the opportunity to taste before, and it's like sometimes you go to these restaurants and the wine list is huge, and like, I don't know what I want. I want something familiar, but not like huge name.
Yeah.
And when you see a winery that you have a connection with or that you've had in the past that kind of resonated with you, I mean, that's what you usually gravitate towards. I remember my first dinner at Fairlawn, which was downtown, is no longer there, unfortunately. I was really excited to taste the LaRue wines. And I had had those in Texas 7 years before that. And Katie had come out and worked the market and was said hi. And so I'm like sitting in San Francisco in a epic San Francisco dining establishment. And I was just excited to see her wine. And I bought it. And I told all my friends, like, we've got to get this wine. Like, she's really cool. She's a nice person,
Hmm.
relatively small production.
Yeah.
And there's only so many choices that you can make, and I think we have to be careful with our funds. You can spend the same amount of money on kind of a big brand that maybe doesn't have as much of an identity or as much of a story, and that's fine if that's what you like. But
Hmm.
if you want to kind of like make an impact with your funds, I think it's kind of about supporting, like regenerative farms, and it's about supporting like, mom and pop wine shops, and it's about kind of all those things. Like we can all go to Total Wine and we can all go to Bevmo, and those are great, and wine.com, those are great, and they allow a lot of amazing access to wines in maybe more suburban areas.
Hmm.
But we're lucky to be in San Francisco and to have the access that we do.
100%. And I think one of the biggest hurdles that we have moving forward is, my parents' generation, they had very few, there was a few tastemakers at the
Hmm.
time that kind of told you who and what to drink.
Hmm.
And there wasn't as much competition. There's far more competition
True.
now. And so now you've got a younger generation that had mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, whoever that drank certain wines, and maybe they grew up on them, liked them, didn't, whatever. But there's a whole new world, and they're trying to create their or understand wine in their own context. So they walk into a wine store and they see all those soldiers lined up on the shelves and somebody standing behind a counter, and it can be like going on a first date.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. And I have been in this business for, 20-ish years now. And I still walk into a wine shop and I'm still dazzled by the array of things that I don't understand. And I'm not a sommelier. I'm a wine lover.
Yeah.
I love drinking wine and I love making wine. But the biggest thing for me is when I see somebody young walk in the door, younger than myself, and you can sometimes are guided by maybe a parent or
Sure.
somebody that knows a little bit more wine, and there's some comfort in that for them. But if they come in without that, sometimes it can be super intimidating.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that they understand, like, look, it's just wine, like, and there's so many different flavors and colors and textures and amazing things awaiting you if you want to take that journey. Don't be intimidated by it. Find people you trust, and hope it's sort of like news. You can find things that are like fast and fresh, but don't really have much context.
Hmm.
But look for people that actually have some general knowledge and that you trust, and then work from there. And that's a whole world that can open up to you. But I have seen it more times than not where somebody will put their foot in the door, look at the array of wines, and then back
Yeah.
away
Yeah.
and run and grab a 6 pack of Modelo
Yep.
and head on home.
That's the comfort brand. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we have to, and it doesn't have to be kitschy. I think there's some people have tried many different spins on it to try and make it more accessible in a way, or more fun. And for me, what the basis of what Renee and I are trying to do is make wines that are delicious.
Hmm.
They show you a place, the Willamette Valley, and if you want to dig down, you can, because we work with so many different small little terroirs, small little vineyards, and then we bottle some of them individually because they're so site specific,
Hmm.
and they are such different expressions of one singular grape, whether it be Chardonnay or Pinot Noir or Gamay. And we want to show that to you. And if you want to take that journey, you certainly can. There's a lot of journeys and a lot of roads you can go down to. I just want to make sure that, like, I want people to feel comfortable with
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
And it bums me out, like, when people say, like, oh, wine is just, I don't even want to go there.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
rather have a cocktail or whatever. And that's great. That's all good. And people get into spirits and all that kind of stuff. But wine is truly an exceptional,
Yeah.
like, expression of a place and the people and all that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the whole impetus to start the podcast was to kind of like remove like the stuffiness and like the pretense in wine.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, my dad was a plumber, my mom was a salesperson. She sold foam in seats,
Mm-hmm.
and wine wasn't a thing in our household until I was like 16.
Right.
And they got into wine, and I was like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, what is this, mom?
You guys are old now.
Yeah.
You like wine, I guess.
Yeah.
And then even still, going to Texas, the wine scene wasn't quite as rich as San Francisco. And people just drank what they liked. And I thought that was really amazing and really beautiful. And, every now and then you have somebody like yourself who makes the wine, and I don't know how much into the farming side of things you are, but you're involved in so many facets of it, and you're incredibly humble, and you just want to kind of like make a delicious wine to put in a bottle and to sell. And every now and then it hits a store or it hits a list somewhere, and it's that kind of gatekeeper, and that gatekeeper can sometimes be what turns people away. Like one bad experience with somebody is all it takes to say, like, maybe wine's not for me.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I was just talking to another sommelier the other day, and they were saying the same thing. They were talking about how they run a wine shop that was previously in a neighborhood that was now sort of changing in terms of, I don't know, just age of people. They're like the parents and grandparents are moving on, and there's a younger generation moving in, and so they're having to modify the selections
Mm,
that they have on the shelf. And there's so many different flavors out there, and with things like the natural wine world, for example, like that has really sort of captivated uh the sort of younger generation, something that they can kind of move towards. There's an understanding, there's words wrapped around it that identify a product that they've heard is good or
mhm,
they've had and love, and that's fantastic. Like, my parents, they talk about when they were younger, they were drinking Riuniti and Matus and Lancers. Like that
mhm.
was what was cool, or what they
Right.
could afford, or
Yeah.
whatever. When they knew those names and they were familiar to them, and so they went and bought them. And if they drank them now, I don't necessarily know if they'd like them. As I don't think they really liked them, they
Right.
just drank it
Yeah,
back
yeah,
then.
yeah.
And now, they're my parents drink really good wines. They love our wines, but they have to, because
Yeah.
they're my parents. But in general, like there's a new wave of people, and there's kind of two sides of the world. There's things that are made in certain styles. There's classic
Mhm,
wines, but what I often see, and another good example, like the somm I was talking to, would be an intern of ours that we had this year, and she had kind of cut her teeth working in the world, and then when she got into the wine and a little bit on the restaurant side. And the event side, she was drinking some more sort of like natural skin contact wines, and she's like, I really enjoyed them, and they were really fun to drink, and there was a party atmosphere that was sort of associated with it. So she did harvest with us, and then we started popping open some bottles from our cellar. And at a certain point, she was like, wow, these wines are like, there's so much going on. There's so much. It almost felt like she was saying that there was a veil lifted from her
right.
eyes when she was now looking at these wines and seeing the purity of some
Sure.
of them and
Yeah.
how delicious they were. And then, like, where did this come from? And what is this grape?
Yeah.
And like, what is Nebbiolo?
Yeah.
Or what is Cabernet Franc? And then just discovering these things. And now she's amassing stacks of wine in her hallway. So these kind of like aha moments of people who come into our sphere and start to enjoy wine in a different way, that's super gratifying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a place here in San Francisco, and it's great. And I've been there and I've drank the wines, and the wines are all really good, but it's natural leaning, and it's so funny because like you look at the wine and the descriptors are like, you know, beach blankets and babes or whatever.
Yeah.
It has like nothing to do with the wine, but you're like, okay, cool, that sounds fun, right? Or maybe
Yeah.
they're drinking it and it's like, what does this wine make me think of or whatever? But it's cool to see wine being consumed. First of all, people drinking natural wine, at least they're drinking wine. That's how I feel.
Mm.
It's something. And there's a lot of really great products out there, and there's a lot of products that are maybe not my style that are obviously worthy of recognition as well. But it's great to see kind of like people being able to just enjoy a glass of wine and not overthink it so much. Because
Mm.
after being in the industry as long as I have, and like I taste a wine, it's when I'm done drinking wine, I'm drinking beer
Mm-hmm.
because I just want to be able to just relax and just drink a beer and not have to think about it, right? And I think that's kind of where natural wine seems like it fits in, is to like that proletariat kind of beverage at this point where it's
Mm-hmm.
like I just want to drink something good, and it's natural. So you
Yeah.
feel like, I'm taking care of what I'm putting in my body, or I'm contributing to this like healthier processes, which is
Yeah.
great too.
As long as it's genuine, and
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And it's like there's so many things that you can do. Renee and I are having this conversation all the time, like about you know um, we're farming, and we are farming organically.
Mhm.
And we have a small vineyard on our property, and it was planted in the 70s, and then I tore it out because it was dying of phylloxera, and then replanted it. But every decision we make has some sort of impact. Now it's a 3-acre vineyard, so it's not, in the scheme of things, the impact on the world is almost negligible. But you try and do your best. And but there's so many other things that we have to think in this business. Like, we're talking about bottle weights
Mhm.
and things like capsules. Like, we have capsules on our bottles, and so this is our last year of doing capsules.
Mhm.
And I will say, aesthetically, like, I love them. I
Yeah.
think they look great. I love the
All the shades are
packages.
so
I
cute.
know, and
Yeah.
like, I work really hard. I do all of that myself, and so, but then we're like, why are we doing
Yeah.
this? It actually serves no okay, cool. Like, we need to do this, and then do we need to go to a lighter weight bottle? And like, so there are a lot of things that are changing in our world and in the winemaking world that are very positive.
Mhm.
And when I first got into this business, and I haven't been in that long, but I do remember that the heavier the bottle, the package,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was what it was about, and everybody was all about it.
Yeah.
And there's vestiges of that left in my psyche
Yeah.
that I have to overcome. But the reality is like, packaging and things like that, or descriptions, or how people are perceiving the wines, is very important.
Mhm.
And like, we're like just removing the capsules, and now eventually moving towards a even lighter weight bottle. Those are all important steps that
Yeah.
we can do that actually are meaningful, but terrifying at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. You're stepping out into the great unknown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of people who do it. I was talking to the owner of Felton Road. We were in a conference winemaking thing, IPNC, last year, and he was making a very great argument for, like, there is no reason for any of us to have a heavyweight bottle. He's
Yeah.
like, it does absolutely nothing for the wine. As long as the wine, or as long as the bottle is sound
Mhm.
and holds liquid, the lighter the better.
Yeah.
Because then we're obviously decreasing our carbon footprint,
Yep.
all the things that we're all talking about right
Yeah.
now. But as long as the consumer perception isn't like, oh, you've cheapened up on me,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
or the wine's not as good because the packaging isn't as fancy as it
Mhm.
used to be. So those are meaningful steps that we're all trying to make to be, better humans,
Mhm.
as well as
Yeah.
better business owners.
Yeah, I think the foil is one that's an interesting thought because during the pandemic there was a lot of supply chain issues.
Yeah.
And I remember one of our producers, Foxen from Santa Maria,
Mm-hmm.
had issues getting foils.
Mm-hmm.
And they just like had to ask the question, like, why are we even putting foils on the bottles? Like, foil used to be for keeping pests out. It used to be
Exactly.
for maintaining the integrity of the cork.
Yep.
For whatever purpose. Now it doesn't really serve a purpose.
Right.
It's more expensive. It just goes right in the trash. Like,
100%.
it's pretty, it's cool, but also, like, how important is it? I mean, if you were gonna go lightweight bottle, no foil, package redesign or something, it'd probably be met with like a lot more resistance. But I think, while I like the foils, I can totally understand kind of where it's coming from.
Yeah, and I actually got a deeper understanding of foils and all that stuff during the pandemic, because I was dealing with the same thing. Our capsules are made in Austria,
Mm-hmm.
and so the aluminum, and this drip ring is too big to use polylam. And so we were like, we have to continue to use aluminum, but there was all these supply chain issues, and they were having, mining it in one country, bringing it over to Austria, then shipping it to us, then we're putting it on the bottle. And like, so we're just thinking like, gosh, this would be such an easy thing for us to eliminate. But there is that part of me that's hanging on
Sure.
to the sort of vestigial tale of what I believe is fine wine.
Right.
It's like, I can't even think of a Burgundy that doesn't not have a capsule.
Yeah, I mean, Pure Colin Murray does wax.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah,
I mean, and
but-
we did wax for years
Oh, okay.
before we did this. So up till 2019, we waxed all of our
Mhm,
bottles,
mhm.
and by we, Renee
Yeah.
did all of it. And then she was just like waxing all of these bottles by herself.
Mhm.
And she finally just said, no, we
That's so
can't do it
funny.
anymore.
And now you're doing the foils here.
So now we do the foils, but now we're going to move away from it.
I see. Yeah.
So
How's how's this vintage been so far? I mean, I guess, maybe we could just do a quick recap on post 2020 fires. We've
mhm,
had a lot of 21s today, and the
mhm.
21s were awesome, but 21 was challenging because it was a warmer vintage,
It
or warm later, I guess.
it was so we usually each vintage I feel like has a singular identifier. I don't
Mhm.
know why it just kind of works out this way. Like
Yeah.
something that we can kind of one one sort of sound bite that really works well. So 21 was the vintage of the Heat Dome, where we had it in June, I believe, June or July. It was quite early. So we ended up, but because it was so early, it didn't really have that much effect
Mhm.
on the fruit because everything was still kind of tucked inside the canopy. It was early in the season. There was still enough groundwater. And so that was 21. Then we had a warm growing season, but beautiful,
Mhm.
just very, very consistent. Not a lot of heat spikes after that.
Mhm.
We were picking mostly in September, a little bit in October, but it was a fantastic vintage, full of ripeness. It was a delicious, utterly delicious vintage. 22, the soundbite for that was the frost.
Mhm.
So we had early April, it warmed up. We had bud break, and then we had a frost that came through, did some damage throughout the valley, and really set us back because then it continued to stay cold and wet after that and set us back about 3 to 4 weeks.
Mhm.
But then we were blessed with a beautiful summer, and then the big sort of cherry on top was October, which was gorgeous and dry and
Mhm.
warm.
Mhm.
So we were able to pick pretty deep into October and have what we all talk about, which is hang time
Mhm.
and ripeness without a lot of sugar
Right.
and keeping your natural acidity. So it was a real beautiful vintage. 22, if you love great Oregon wines, if you love classic Oregon wines, 22 is one to seek out.
Yeah.
And then 23, which is in barrel right now, it was a vintage without too many compromises, or it was a vintage that went pretty smoothly. We did in August have a heat spike, got up to 107 at one point.
Wicked.
And so this is right after a lot of people had pulled leaves in the fruit zone. So we did see a lot of sun burning.
Mhm.
So, but luckily the yields were pretty high. So in most vineyards, we were able to go out and manicure a lot of that fruit off. We had a few older sites that have very little leaf coverage because they just don't set a lot of leaves and not a lot of fruit. Those did see significant burning,
Yeah.
and we lost a lot of fruit to that. But in the end, after sorting out all that fruit, either on the vine or on the sorting line, the 23s are fantastic. A little bit more like 21 in
Mhm.
terms of their ripeness.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
23 is going to be a great vintage as well.
Yeah.
And then 24, yet to be determined. So far, so good. A little bit early. We already have bud break. Being down here in California and looking at Sonoma Napa area, you guys have 3-4 inches of growth, and we're 1 or 2 right
Yeah.
now. So, but it's still a lot
Yeah.
for this time of year. But so far we're getting pretty close to the area where I can start to not worry so much about frost.
Right.
But so far so good.
Yeah, I just saw on Instagram, Matthew Biacart posted that they are dealing with frost in Champagne right now, and it's like right in the middle of bud break, and that sounds
Yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah. It is terrifying, and if you're in Burgundy or if you're in Champagne, those regions over there, they're each year now they're getting more and more instances of frost. They're more continental than we
Yeah.
are. The one thing that does help temper is our proximity to the
Right.
ocean, which is helpful.
Yeah.
So we don't get as many deep freezes over longer periods of times as a lot of those places do. Uh, but I could see in the next, decade or two us having to start putting more money into,
Yeah.
windmills, and some sort of frost
Yeah.
prevention as
Yeah.
we go forward and as it warms and cools in non-normal patterns.
Hmm. And one more thing I wanted to touch on just before we unfortunately need to wrap is the Ribbon Ridge AVA. You guys
Mhm.
are located in Ribbon Ridge?
No, we're in the Eola
Oh,
Hills,
Eola Hills. I'm sorry, but you have.
but we do work with a site in the Ribbon
I
Ridge. Yeah,
see. Okay, my
and I
apologies.
worked there for years.
Right, right.
Yeah, I worked with a couple of different vineyards in the Ribbon Ridge for years, and then the Sequitur Vineyard, which is one of our bottlings,
Hmm.
is right smack dab in
Yeah,
the
I
middle.
guess that's the wine I was thinking of. For some
Hmm.
reason, I thought that's where you guys are located. I apologize. Um, yeah, it seems like feels like a relatively exclusive appellation just because of it's so small and there's only 9 producers located in Ribbon Ridge or 10 producers located in Ribbon Ridge or
Oh, I'd
something.
have to do. I don't. I should know this. I mean, there's vineyards owned, but in terms of wineries, that sounds about right.
Yeah,
There might be a couple more there now, but yeah, it's a small pile of dirt.
yeah.
It's kind of nestled in between Chehalem Mountains on one side, and then you've got Yamhill Carlton on the other. It is a little small, just piece that's most exclusively marine sedimentary
Hmm.
soils,
Hmm.
and it's protected by those two other by YC and by Chehalem, so it doesn't get a lot of wind in most parts.
I
As you
see.
get up towards the top of it, near like Harry and Wynn's vineyard, gets a little bit
Hmm.
windier, but nowhere near like if you go across the way into Chehalem Mountains or into the farther reaches of YC.
Right.
So it is a very distinctive appellation and or sub AVA, and it's taken me a long time to figure it out.
Hmm.
I've worked with three vineyards on the west side and one vineyard on the east side. They're very different from each other. The east-sided vineyard is the Flannery vineyard is super savory, very rich, dark fruit. The Beaufrere vineyard, the Upper Terrace and Sequitur, those tend to have a little bit more red fruit, still the savoriness, but not quite as dense and textural
Hmm.
as the east side. The topography is it's you really have to look at a map. If you look at the west side, it is the west side, so you think like, oh, western exposure, but there's all these sort of canyons that have been dug into the side of the hill, and it's carved out these southeast exposures.
Wow.
And if you look at it, it goes like Bramble Hill, which is up at the top, the most northerly, and that's owned by Jackson family now, or Katie Jackson. Then you move over and you've got Bryce Vineyard, and then you've got Sequitur Vineyard and Upper Terrace, and then Beaufrere, and then Patricia Green. They're all in these kind of like little carved out notches in the hillside. The east side is a little bit more consistent in terms of there's not as many of these canyons
Hmm.
and such that are built into the matrix, but completely different fruit. And it's a very dynamic place. It's home to some fantastic producers, Brick House, Beaufrere being, and Patricia Green Cellars being,
Hmm.
the top three, and then you've got also RR Vineyards and what they're doing with the Ridgecrest, which is the oldest vineyard up there.
Yeah,
It's a cool place to make
it's
wine.
super cool.
Yeah.
And I guess one more question for you is as you approach your 10-year anniversary with 100 Sons,
Hmm.
what's your 5, 10, 15? What do you think the future holds?
That's a good question, and we don't have a completely honest answer because we don't know yet.
Hmm.
So we have two young children, 11 years old and 14 years old at the moment. Are they going to one day want to like take over this dynasty that we've created? Like,
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, there are pieces of me that harbor, or not pieces. I mean, I have a dream of, our kids taking it over, but is that a financially viable thing? Renee and I have put everything we have into it. We have limited retirement. We work 7 days a week. Could the business get to a point where it could support not only our family, but their families in the
Mhm,
future?
mhm.
So we have to be realistic with that question and say, okay, well, is Hundred Suns something that's, built to sell? Like, that's never why we started it.
Mhm. Right.
That has never been the intention. Like, we wanted to make great wines, and we wanted to create something we were super proud of. So I'm gonna err to the side of hoping that maybe we can pass it along. We have no investors. So we have nobody that is, looking for a payout.
Right.
We have nobody telling us what to make or how to do it, as of yet. So, but the future is uncharted, and we're growers, winemakers, and business people to a degree. We're less good at the business side
Mhm.
than the making and the growing and doing all that fun
It's also
stuff.
the least fun side.
There's really fun parts
Okay.
to it. It's extremely gratifying.
Right.
It's so gratifying when you see the momentum begin and you see people like you have like one guy that pops into my mind is this guy John Brooks. He just passed away. This guy is a 3-star general, and if you met him, when somebody said this 3-star general is going to come taste with you, and you're like, oh my god, this guy is going to be like, I just pictured like Arnold Schwarzenegger in a
Yeah.
movie or something, and he's like the kindest, most gentle guy. And he was turning people on to our wines, and people have said, oh, John Brooks, he brought people to our winery every year, and they have become like family, and they come every year, and these people buy our wines, and you're like, wow, this is amazing, like this is what we've created. And so that is extremely gratifying. Now, yeah, where does it go in the future? We don't have a perfect idea. I'm sure we should probably sit down with like a business analyst
Sure.
someday and
Yeah.
like create a plan, but when every day is a Tuesday, it's hard to fit that into your schedule.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Well, I mean, in the meantime, I'm excited to continue to enjoy these wines, and I'll have to make it up. My wife's been,
Yes.
and we snagged up some of that amphora Syrah that you have, and
Yeah.
that's in our personal cellar, and I can't wait to taste more and see what the future holds. So
Yeah, well, we invite you and anybody else who wants to come up, and not just Hundred Suns. Like, there's so many other places that I
right,
want people to get introduced to.
yeah, awesome,
Yeah.
Grant.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks.
Yeah.